just make them straight away panelists. Okay. Can you see me, Matthew?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Because now, if I speak, you should see me. Okay,
We
all
can
right.
see you and hear you.
Very good. So welcome everyone to this Nexus seminar. And this is a special honor to have today very honorable and valuable speakers. The Nexus seminar today, apologies for the delay. We had some minimal technical issues that we are solving right now. Today, the webinar is entitled Towards a Knowledge Nexus Agenda and Contribution from the Social Science. And it's my honor to have among us many valuable speakers. We have Professor Krisi Lapsidou from the Department of Civil Engineering and University of Thessaly, member of the steering committee of the Nexus Knowledge Action Network and Future Earth. Dr. Andrea Pierce from the Uniedel Golden Chair of the Environment from the Biden School of Public Policy and Administration, University of Delaware. Dr. Mona Arnold, which is a principal scientist at the VTT Technical Research Center, Finland, Ltd. Dr. Luis Gallagher from the Environmental Governance Lead Global Sand Observatory Initiative at the UNEP Grid Geneva. Professor Davide Paulo Farah, which is a founder, president, and director at the Global Law Initiative for Sustainable Development, and associate professor at the West Virginia University. And last but not least, our ex-colleague, Dr. Matthew Kurian, consortium lead at the Belmont Forum project of the Cyber-Enabled Disaster Resilience, and from the Penn State University, USA. Please let me give you some small housekeeping rules before we get started. And we are looking forward for your comments and questions. If you have any question during the presentation, please type them in the Q&A box. I will bring them up during the presentation or at the end of it so that we will have time for your question at the end. If you need any technical support, please instead use the chat function. Please use and select gallery view option for better use. That said, I just want to say that this is a joint effort of the UNU Flores and the Nexus Project Cluster. And Nexus Project Cluster is an initiative which comes from different research center and projects which team up for increasing and provide more impact on communication and dissemination of the Nexus. The Nexus, of course, as you might know, you are all expert in here, includes sector like water, energy, food, land, but also climate, and as well societal challenges like public health, rural, urban development. We include into the Nexus project also circular economy and project that try to provide links between circular economy and the project of the Nexus. That said, I won't take more time from our speakers, and I will give the floor to the first speakers, which is Professor Krisi Lapsidou. And Krisi, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Serena. So good to see you. Yeah, on camera. We haven't had the chance to meet in person, unfortunately, but we will soon. I know we will.
Hopefully we will.
All right. Okay. So thanks for this invitation. This is a great opportunity to speak about the Nexus. I'm going to share my screen here, right? Can I do that? Yeah.
You should be enabled to do so.
Yes. Yes. Let me see now. So I'm sharing like this, or I can take it to full screen. Do you see my screen now? Yeah. All right. I'll take it. All right. Okay, so my name is Chrissy Laspidou. I'm a professor at the University of Thessaly in Greece at the Department of Civil Engineering. I'm also the Vice President of Research and Technology at the Water Europe in Brussels, which is the main organization, the main stakeholder in terms of water on a European level. And of course, I'm on the steering committee of the Nexus Project Cluster, which is really an exciting effort to create really a Nexus research community and try to use all the experts and all the other stakeholders in order to co-create knowledge and apply it in practice. So this is what we'll be speaking about today. We start, so the idea here is that we need humans. And I keep saying that it's never the technologies that limit us. At the end of the day, as engineers, as scientists, we always have the tools to address the problems. And the limitations are not in the tools, even though people might think that it's in the science, but it's not. It is in collaborations, it's in people, it's in humans actually sitting together and recognizing a shared interest and shared goals. And we always speak about the good of the, the common good, the good of the people, or the individual good. And only when people come together and share their interest in seeing how the actions of one can affect the other and how we reach a common good after bringing all these people together, then we can reach better, we can reach our objectives in terms of sustainability. Of course, human capital. Human capital is not something new, and this is something that we can trace back in the 18th century when Adam Smith talked about humans and human capital into a book that is entitled An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations. And in this book, he suggests that if we actually invest in human capital rather than in all other capitals through training and education, then at the end of the day, we will have a more profitable enterprise. In this case, we will have collective wealth of society. So we will have a group of people that is, our society will be smarter and, will use resources better at the end of the day. So it makes a lot of sense to actually invest in humans. And this is also reflected very, very well in the European Green Deal. We see the statement, leave no one behind. So one part of the European Green Deal is the just transition. So we want to go through this transition in a fair and inclusive way. Why? Why is it important to do that these days? Because the most vulnerable and the most exposed to the harmful effects of climate change are the ones that will be mostly affected by environmental degradation. So we really need humans and their needs at the heart of this. If we want to manage a transition that will lead to significant changes and business models, we need our citizens to have the skills, and we need we need to bring everyone and include everyone, bring them on board. And when I say everyone, this includes marginalized groups, includes of course everyone, and I will get into my favorite subject, which is gender. So we need also to bring the women on board. And I'm glad to see a nice panel of ladies here. I always make fun of that. Anyways, when I see a lot of guys in suits in these panels, I always make these points. Okay, so right, Serena is laughing with me as well. So social equity. And why is it important when it comes to resource use? One might say, what are we speaking here? Are we speaking about resources or about people? And in reality, if we want to speak about resource use, we need to include the people, and we need to include social equity. So gender, social equality, and poverty. These considerations are all very tightly interconnected with resource use. And of course, their use is highly context dependent. So whenever there is social inequality, then we will see this is one of the main reasons, of course, for the existence of poverty not only in Africa and in third world countries, but actually in high income countries such as the United States, for example. So we need to understand the gender, the social equality, and the poverty situation within each case study. And we need to include them in whatever it is we are working towards. So co-creation of knowledge is absolutely critical in this case, especially because we speak about resources that is a social good, and especially when we are facing with climate change, with extreme events, with environmental degradation that mostly affects these groups. So on the one hand is, that we need to bring everyone on board in order to educate them and give them equitable access to the resources. And on the other hand is that, women are at the center of using these resources in many societies. They are the ones in charge of the household, cooking, water use, and of course their opinions are not taken into account when we speak about planning and scientific directions and such decisions. These are usually not including women in many cases, and this is something that might hurt us. So a recent study by the Stockholm Environment Institute identified 3 key challenges in integrating gender and social equality. Because when we run our models and when we run these analysis of resource use, we always need to integrate that. But the challenges are that there is a lack of awareness of gender issues among researchers and policymakers. So even to this day, we see that there is a lack of awareness. There is lack of inclusion of women in projects, as I said, and in technical work. And there is also a lack of relevant data, data that is relevant to gender and social equity. Why? Again, these are all related, because if you don't recognize the problem, of course, you don't have the data. But this is one of the, and now that we plan our new projects, we always try, to track also and use data that are gender and, group specific. So the need to develop these tools and methods to better address and find solutions to these inequities relating to resources worldwide is really urgent. Now, okay, I think from now on, a lot of this discussion is things that people know. So why the nexus? Of course, in order to achieve, the SDGs that we all know and love, we need to consider all the different. We need to have a nexus approach. We can't see things in isolation, in silos. No more silo thinking. We consider all, because if you don't, then you see that some of these goals are also in conflict with each other. So it might get to a point that it's impossible to achieve all goals at the same time if you don't take a nexus approach. So this has been recognized, and this is something that we are working towards in our projects. And at the heart of this, again, it's the people. It's co-creating, is taking everybody on board and using their knowledge, their opinions, engaging them in order to achieve what it is you want to achieve. Okay, so at the heart of Nexus challenges, of course, I mean, in this day and age that we are seeing the climate change having such important effects in our everyday life. We see the extreme events. We need to be concerned with our modes of production and consumption to make it sustainable. We need to be concerned with poverty and resource scarcity. All of these lead to the equitable and sustainable access to food, water, and energy. So at the heart of many of our problems is the equitable access to this. It's more of a social issue rather than anything else. When we consider everything in a Nexus approach, we will see that it is the institutions that need to get involved in order to achieve these. Once again, it's the people and the institutions that need to get over their isolation, and this is not easy. This is not easy by no means. I mean, we try it every day here in Greece or in a European level. The water people and the energy people and the biodiversity, one might say, or the food people, all think in isolation. They all want their own agenda and they don't want to collaborate. So we have a lot of work to do in changing the institutions in that direction. Okay. I have a couple of examples here, but I will skip through them quickly because I think our audience today is very much, they know, what is going on with the Nexus. I don't think I need to go. I have this little video here where I show how we use the water, we do get food, but on the other hand, we consume a lot of energy and we deplete our water resources. And all this needs to be in consideration. But I think our group, like I said, knows. I want to speak a little bit about the tools that we use. And in Sim4Nexus, we have tried, and these are some of the new things that we might use. A serious game. So a game that might take away, these would be the tools that we use in order to bring everybody on board, because we can't expect everybody to be able to read complex graphs and to process all this scientific information. So we need to give them the tools to make, and I think this is one of the biggest challenges, and this is where research might have a lot of work to do, when we need to simplify knowledge, make it accessible, and make it digestible by a lot of different people, even the ones that are not technology savvy or the ones that are not engineers or scientists. So what we did in Sim4Nexus, this European project that has finished very recently, is we created these serious games. So a game that incorporates all this complex science behind it and gives a nice interface for the player. And the player is given a stack of cards. These cards are, for example, policies that he or she might want to try. So they would play the cards, spend the money, and see the effect it has in a Nexus perspective. So see the effect it has on water, on energy, on food, and this way be able to explore the synergies or the trade-offs and see how realistic it is and what the effect is. So in this case, the question of scale plays a lot of an important role. So you might think that with this policy that will cost this much money, you might achieve something, but the scale might not be suitable. And then you will see that this is not how you thought of it initially. And you need to do something and then play another policy on top and see the synergies, how this policy might work synergistically with the other one in order to achieve a good event. So we have developed these serious games for many. I mean, we have one for Greece that is really exciting, and some of them are transboundary and stuff like that. So yeah, I don't want to take a lot of, I don't want to be, run long. Let me see. Yeah. So this is my last slide. So in these serious games, and we recently got a new Erasmus project that is focusing exactly on this. And this becomes even more relevant now in the COVID era, when we try to address all these stakeholders, and how do you do it? It's all digital, and the people are left on their computers. So this becomes even more relevant to improve on these tools. So in this new Erasmus project, we are developing exactly this. We're developing and testing games for students, for academics, and then later for stakeholders to see how how we can convince them and get them to get engaged, and then get this knowledge and create results based on that. So this would be a way to bring them on board. So I think there is a lot of hope in those games. Some of them are board games, but like I said, now within the COVID times, digital wins, I think. Yes, so I think I will leave it at that, and then answer questions at the end. But yeah, so the point is to invest and find these new tools that will be able to engage our audiences. Okay, I think I'm okay time-wise.
Perfectly on time, Chrissy, as always. Thank you, Chrissy, for this very engaging speech between the gender, but also how to use tools for advancing the Nexus. I think it was wonderful. I will leave the floor now to our next speaker, which is Dr. Andrea Pierce, and the floor is yours. Thank you, Andrea, for being here.
There we go. So hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay? I hope.
Perfectly. Slides are fine.
Thank you, Serena. So thank you, Chrissy, also for that good introduction on the Nexus. And I agree wholeheartedly at having so many lovely ladies on the panel today. It does my heart good to see that. So I am joining you from Delaware in the United States. And I want to talk a little bit about the governance side of the Nexus, and especially with respect to cities. So we get this very long term that I want to unpack here a little bit: urban, food, energy, water, Nexus governance, right? And what is this? Why does this matter? So really quick background on my involvement in the Nexus. I participate in the Creating Interfaces project funded by the Belmont Forum. The full title is Building Capacity for Integrated Governance at the Food, Water, Energy Nexus in Cities on the Water. So we're really focused very much on this capacity building element. And we have 3 case cities: Wilmington, Delaware here in the United States, which I'm the lead for that case, and then 2 cases in Europe: Lipsk in Poland and Tulcea in Romania. These 3 cities are of similar population size. They all lie on a river relatively close to a large body of water, and so have a relatively similar sort of climates and context in some respects. But of course, their national contexts are quite different, and their governance, their local governance and environmental governance is very different. So my involvement with this project has been to be the lead for Wilmington, but also to help to look at the comparative governance across our cases. So I just want to draw your attention to the urban elements, this urban nexus. Why do we do this? Well, the majority of the global population now is urban, and rapid urbanization is happening in places already strained, with a few provisioning services and facing poverty and climate stress. So we do expect rising insecurities across all few systems in the future, especially for urban residents. And as we saw in the previous presentation, the SDGs do have one particular goal focused on sustainable cities and communities here, with one of their targets to substantially increase the number of cities and settlements adopting and implementing integrated policies and plans. So this is where we think that the Nexus can help here, that if we adopt some sort of Nexus approach to these systems, we can use it to help achieve integrated policies and plans. So let me back up a little bit, because I have to say that a lot of folks in the popular press and media use this term quite loosely and interchangeably. And so let's lay some ground rules here. Governance, the definition that I use is a process. So this is a verb of collectively managing public problems such as resource security. So governance itself is time and context dependent. It changes place to place over time. It's not static. So the literature that I very much draw from is from political science, public policy, public administration. And we think about governance as not just government, right? So when we read in the news, especially, people use the term governance to talk about what government does, but it's actually much larger than that. It's a network of actors in government, business, nonprofit, and private citizens all acting together to solve common problems. It's a form of collective action. So governance itself can be considered a complex dynamic system, just like the few systems are complex and dynamic. So as a complex system, it has a structure. It has rules and procedures and norms. We can look at it from an input-output type perspective, with outputs being policies or plans or other sorts of decisions that are adopted collectively, with outcomes that we can evaluate in terms of efficiency, effectiveness, equity, and so forth. There's certainly power dynamics at play in terms of which of the actors in the system can help to determine the outcomes. And so there's characteristics that we like to evaluate from this perspective, including the capacity to act, the legal or policy authority to act, and legitimacy to act. So we get this long-term urban, food, energy, water, nexus governance, right? What are we talking about? We're talking about a scale that's urban. So this is most equivalent to the municipal level, but it is certainly embedded in vertical networks, national and international networks of governments. And so we have to adopt a multi-level governance lens when we look at urban governance. And this is especially important because cities may have little actual legal authority, capacity, or resources to act on these systems. Yet this is the scale where people live, where they work, where they interact with their environment most closely. We also have to think about the urban scale as embedded within horizontal networks. So within the city, we have multiple neighborhoods all together comprising a network, but these cities also work together with their suburbs, in their metropolitan areas, and in some cases, these megapolitan areas, these very large urban regions. And so this is really an extended network that operates at the urban scale. And of course, the subject matter here is the few nexus. We heard about the silos that operate in each few system with its own governance network. Recent research suggests that the water system often dominates the network, but dominates the nexus, but this is certainly context dependent. So in different places around the world may face different challenges and different systems may dominate. But at the end of the day, sustainability and resilience are the driving goals behind this idea of integrated governance. We need to think about all systems together, break down the silos. So what do we know about this urban nexus governance? Well, unfortunately, we found in our own literature review, and other recent studies have said the same, there's actually very few empirical studies of urban governance or governance generally at the urban scale. People have been talking about nexus governance in nexus studies for years. We heard it's the missing link. We've a fairly recent review of 40 years of nexus literature said issues of institutional structure, governance, equity, resource access, and behavior were underdeveloped in the literature. This is an interesting sequence of terms thrown in here. Governance is one among several things. And this is important because, again, the literature often is not super clear on what exactly is governance and how does it connect to these other terms. So we have to keep all of these things sort of together in our mind as we go. Another recent analysis of the literature found that nexus scholars often recommend this idea of integrated governance, but don't actually study it in depth. Governance was focus of only 28 studies out of 1,455 peer-reviewed journal articles in the particular period of time. But of these studies, scholars are doing all sorts of different things when they're looking at governance. So they found it covers 24 different concepts and 8 themes. So this figure represents their sort of idea of the 8 themes that all surround Nexus governance. And I'll draw your attention to the right-hand side, with urban governance being one of the 8 themes, but it's certainly all connected here to other things like global governance, environmental governance, water governance, cooperative governance, and so forth. So what else do we know about this, this Nexus governance at the urban scale? So it very much carries transaction costs to organizations and individuals, and those of us who are economists or trained in economics know this very well, and on all organizations to some extent have transaction costs in their involvement, but these can really prove to be a barrier for effective governance. We know that actors are highly embedded in their existing hierarchical structures in the silos that we're talking about. In some cases, we may need legal or policy changes to allow collaboration across institutions within these networks. And in fact, this was something that we really found in our Polish case, that organizations were not allowed to share information, for instance, in some cases with other organizations. For effective governance, we need elaboration of shared principles. What is it that we're trying to accomplish and why, and sort of what powers we want to have, what extent of co-creation or collaboration do we want. But unfortunately, we've also found that this does not emerge only from, that effective governance does not emerge only from this elaboration of shared values, that we need true structural reconfigurations of governance and a shifting of power to some stakeholders that haven't traditionally been involved in management of the governance systems. And unfortunately, at the end of the day, we're talking about urban scale governance. We have a real lack of systematic and comparable data to study these things. So part of what we've been trying to do in our project is take our 3 cases, and to the extent that we can, start to develop some of this comparable data to evaluate governance, but it's hard even with just 3 cases. So imagine expanding it to the thousands of cities globally, and you realize the scale of the challenge to scholarship. So where do we go from here? I'm pulling from a bunch of different studies here, but one on the urban governance literature review suggests we need research specifically on how actors and institutions shape resource access, distribution, and use, and on co-production of knowledge with stakeholders. These are both issues that we're trying to address in our project. Second, we need imaginative and iterative use of case studies to engage local and regional organizations to build capacity to address local development priorities. Thank you, Dr. Kurian. I'm sure we can hear more from you at the and during your presentation and during the Q&A at the end. And we truly need new transdisciplinary ways of managing teams, working with publishers and funding projects, because this is an extraordinarily complex endeavor. And so to that end, I do thank you very much, Belmont Forum, for your support of our project and other projects looking at the Nexus, because transdisciplinary research is very challenging to fund. Where else can we go? Well, the one recent review said the fragmentation in the governance literature offers an opportunity to strengthen this concept. We really need to hone in on what we mean and use these terms coherently and consistently during our studies. That a lot of the research has a normative assumption that we need participatory processes to achieve effective governance and policy integration across the Nexus. But there's, as I said, this lack of empirical study specifically of governance in practice. So which processes, how do we do it, where do we do it, and when? Of course, these really basic empirical questions are important. And we need some critical approaches to the Nexus where we really ask fundamental questions like, is Nexus really is integrated governance of the Nexus truly our goal here? And it was recommended to bring in social sciences like political science, econ, and law. Of course, as a policy scholar, I would say policy and public administration, but so it goes. So my last point is just, let's try to broaden the Nexus tent here. Often the Nexus research is dominated by technical considerations. We need to acknowledge and recognize the political nature of use and governance. And if we do not recognize the politics here, we risk reproducing existing inequalities in resource allocations and power structures. So with that, I want to end here, and I'm certainly happy to take questions at the end more specifically about our project and what we're finding in our project. So thank you.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you also for bringing now the new sector, not that new, but to integrating more on governance and expanding also to the gaps that should be bridged between governance and the Nexus, and how the Nexus should be include more, not only participatory, but also governance towards also political science. So I will move from that, and I'm sure there will be more questions later on to be discussed. I leave the floor to our colleague here next to Mona Arnold. Good morning or good afternoon now in Finland. Mona, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Let me put this in the slideshow mode. So do you see my screen well now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Still, sorry, Mona, we are still on the non-full presentation, at least not in mine.
Okay. I seem to have it in.
Do you have a double screen?
Yes, I have a double screen, so I need to
switch probably the screen.
Yes, and sorry for this.
No problem.
Is this better?
Could you click on the, yes, there we are.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mona.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so thanks, it's an honor for me to be here in this forum with my technical background, which maybe also the title, my title reveals. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about digitalization for sustainability, and here in the digital, in the Nexus context. So here I'm going to look at the digitalization as an enabler for improved Nexus thinking, providing ways to gather and manage data in a fairer and more balanced way, link agriculture with biodiversity, improved policy and decision making, and of course, above all, how it also improves or enables awareness raising among citizens. It's not only going to be a technocrat's speech. There's be a lot of the challenges to the efficient use of data and digital solutions as well. Before getting into there, I will just raise this quite a new buzzword, the twin transition. That means the combination or the enforcement of green transition and a digital transformation at the same time, which has been raised in the Green Deal that aims to, in the European Green Deal, that aims to decouple economic growth from resource use by 2050. And we look at some of the core elements of the Green Deal here depicted in this picture. We are really in the same nexus we are discussing here today. A highly strategic item, so to say. So first, going into a little bit like gathering and managing data. By digitalization, you are let's say there is an increasing amount of data in today's in these different sectors of the Nexus, means that there is a need for automation, and which we do today with new digital tools, sensors, drones, satellites, cameras, put them into databases, and with artificial intelligence enabled solution, process, manage, and integrate them. So we go from data to information and improve and increase the knowledge on the sustainable systems and biodiversity. So the amount of data is waste. So the key here is to turn all these inputs into better information so you can do something decent with it, like for more effective decision making and enabling resource efficiency. One other key question here is the availability of and the access to the needed data. So is the access actually an issue? And here we come to the interesting question of the data ownerships. The data owners in this in this framework, farmers, public authorities, public local authorities, other stakeholders, are they readily providing information, and why should they? What is their own benefit? So this is something that we have to deal with all the time when collecting, when working with these tools. It's digital tools are also for aligning agriculture and biodiversity, and maybe this futuristic picture of robot pollination is, thanks God, still futuristic. We are not yet substituting the declining bee population with robots, but it's seen already to reduce be a good tool to reduce the environmental impact, foremost in precision agriculture, being able to optimize the use of fertilizers, minimal the use of pesticides, and maybe the furthest is or the most mature solutions are the smart irrigation, where you with IoT solutions, you have developed the IoT solutions working as a framework for collecting data from sensors in the field, from infrastructures and external services such as weather forecasts. And these tools then and indications give the farmers and also, for instance, water resource managers input to minimize surplus use of water, and at the same time then also the energy use. This picture on the side is from a swamp project. The swamp project that they could achieve an 80% savings in the water use only by using this tool. So there are sufficient, there are quite significant savings to be realized. Very importantly, I see is it's enabler, when it's enabler for improved decision and policy making. I think as Chrissy was already talking about, it enables these makers to absorb complex knowledge, and it is Nexus thinking is complex knowledge. With the platforms where the data from different sectors are integrated, or the serious games where you can visualize the Nexus and also evaluate the impact of new policies or your decision. It can also help accelerating and maximizing the effects of environmental policies by better surveillance and follow-up. It's been seen though that that especially if you're working on regional and local level, their incentives are still needed for communication between organizations, even if you have these platforms there, if you have the tools, that it's not self-understood that a water, let's say a legal water responsibility authority sees its stake in communicating with a food organization or an energy organization. So they're referring to maybe to cost, that there is the cost of communication or collaboration, or the risk associated with that. There's a potential loss of some benefits if you have to compromise. So you cannot act fully on your own. So here we've seen that simple mandates are even simple mandates are needed to engage with other agencies. So you actually can raise more efficiently awareness of the trade-offs that the Nexus thinking can bring about. Going over to the citizen side, the awareness raising and citizen engagement is I think cannot be done without digitalization in today's world. And one specific area is the virtual reality experiences, and this picture here to the right depicts a tool that Europe just developed. It's the Pollinator Park. That is a dystopian virtual reality experience of a world, how would a world look like when it's without pollinators. The citizens can also be used for crowdsourcing for data. Here, we need to be very aware of the data quality. It tends to be biased based on the citizens' own interest and sometimes incomplete. Working with citizens, there are 2 points: the how to access people, how to make them interested, and also access for people. And this this slide here shows the results from the recent DC report, the basic digital skills in Europe. And when you see here, like up in the Northern Europe, people are quite well using or quite commonly using internet. Going here down to the other end, there is quite a few regions, countries where less than 40% of the population has like any clue about using internet. So it's then digitalization is there. Chrissy, again, I refer to you. You talked about inclusiveness and fairness, and is digitalization exclusive of or exclusive? Because it's a matter of fact, I mean, the access to information and possibility to use it is biased in European regions. And with this twin transition, with a strong emphasis on green innovation and new technology, it runs the risk of leaving segments of the society behind, where 80 million Europeans don't use or don't have access to the internet. It means that we need new skilled jobs and extensive retraining. It will also have an impact on the labor markets. Structural changes always come with job destruction and job creation effects. And while we in this in the twin transition, I think the EIB has forecasted a net job effect or slightly positive. The positive effect is seen for high skilled workers, while the other segment will without retraining be left behind. Moreover, if you're working a lot in the public area, but the digitalization always comes with a price tag. And the IT companies have successfully developed large and small scale solutions that can help improve, for instance, the situation of biodiversity. It's not self-understood. It's going to be taken into use by a regional authority, for instance, who are assessing what tools they're going to buy and why. Existing economic models rarely today value nature and ecosystem services, and there is neither a fully functioning regulatory framework that supports nexus thinking or improving biodiversity. So there is some hesitancy in investing into solutions for nature protection when it comes to the digital solutions that have been developed for it. I think I will skip this as a matter of for the schedule, and then just get to the summary. Yes, digital tools are amazing enablers to grasp complex systems. I don't think we can do without them anymore. If you when you are looking into systemic approaches, it improves resource efficiency. It enables better decision making and awareness raising. And the good tools and models are developed, but their practical use depends also on available data and its quality. It's like if you buy a really super hammer, but you're without nails, or your nails are crummy, and when the end result is not what you were expecting. Also, the integration of data from various sources and segments can be laborious. And the quality issue is there also a question. And still we are all, I mean, without users, it has no value. So they need to involve the necessary stakeholders who makes the decisions. And then we come to the question that who needs to use it, why would they use it, and then also who can afford to use it. Thanks, that's what I had on my mind today.
Thank you, Mona. And also again, thank you for bringing the potential of the IoT and digitalization into the Nexus world, but also how that could be helpful by involving stakeholders, but also to the challenges that are related to it. I'm sure that there will be more to say. I have a question myself, but I keep it for later on. I will leave now the floor to our next excellent speaker, and is Louise Gallagher. And please, Louisa, the floor is yours, and welcome.
Thank you. Thanks so much. And thanks to the previous speakers. So I am coming from UNEP Grid Geneva. So that is a group which is housed between the University of Geneva and the UN Environment Programme, that's very concerned with taking data and knowledge and transferring it into information, or transforming it into information for decision making. But today I'm going to speak to you a little bit about my experiences with the Nexus, which happened a little bit before I joined this group. So my connection to the Nexus was that I, for 5 years almost, between two organizations, which was WWF and the University of Geneva, managed a transdisciplinary project that looked at the interconnections between water, energy and food using participatory system dynamics modeling. And our aim initially was to be able to create a set of linked indicators so that we would be able to map these interactions and understand them better and guide them towards sustainability outcomes. That was the theory when we started. And as time went on with that project, my role as an environmental economist, so somebody who's concerned with ecosystems and their connection to human systems, was really to actually look further into the process of creating those indicators, creating those systems maps, and really helping that information or that process to have an effect in real world conservation situations. So the unit I was most concerned about was landscape scale, but there was, of course, a vertical integration. And I guess all of that just to give you some background and to understand where I'm coming from today. As I understand, we're having a conversation on what the social science contributions to this Nexus research community can look like, and where we might want to go in the future. Yeah, so I wanted to share a little bit about my motivation to, this is one image and a paper that had a huge effect on me as I was developing my skills in science policy, interfacing, and again, it's coming from the conservation perspective, but we can spend a lot of time and resources monitoring where we're at with sustainability outcomes, and then find that even though we're developing all this data and developing this information and transforming it into something that can support decision making, very often it's hard to act. So we can monitor species decline perfectly to the point where that species no longer functionally exists. And this to me was always I guess the little warning in the background, or the little, devil on my shoulder, reminding me that whatever we're going to do here in terms of producing new knowledge, it can't be divorced from an impact goal. And so I think that's really important to bear in mind, given the bigger context of where Nexus research has to be effective these days. So this is a graph that I'm sure is familiar to many of you, which speaks to the great acceleration we've observed in resource consumption and negative effects on our biosphere and on social equity concerns in the Anthropocene. And the Nexus as an approach that promises a lot when it comes to figuring out these interactions between different resource systems and helping us to manage those interactions more efficiently, to get to a point where we can weigh those trade-offs better and enhance the synergies, which is of course what we need to be doing. It's a big promise, and the Nexus has yet to fully live up to that promise, in my opinion. And I guess within the project group I was in, we were trying to take, Andrea, as you were mentioning, a critical approach to the Nexus method and really understand, is it going to help us in the face of these types of challenges, or what needs to improve fundamentally in the way that we're approaching this analytical procedure or this concept, if it's going to help us face this rather large challenge. So in terms of the social science contributions, this is of course the standard graphic for water, energy, food nexus. So of course I understand that we're connected to climate and land and urban systems and everything really. What I got very curious about was at the interaction of those sectors, what's going on in that, what does Nexus research processes, or what can they look like? What are they doing in that intersection between these sectors and other dimensions? And so I guess from my perspective, the social science contribution is to help us within that intersection start to really enhance dialogue and opportunities for social learning, and that we think and believe we really need if we're going to make those big changes to address our Anthropocene challenges, to produce those fit for purpose integrated assessments we're hoping for, given that we've worked with this assumption that a greater amount of integration in how we're producing knowledge and how we're thinking about our systems leads us to better decision making. To grapple with this concept that Andrea so beautifully outlined around actors, networks, the power, the interests and knowledge, and how those combine. You know, we've got many different pieces of the puzzle to bring together here. And of course, when it comes down to making those choices and the people that are in the balance, how information and knowledge and all the things that we can gather together in this intersection actually affects decision outcomes. So with that in mind, I thought that it might be useful to articulate the contribution that social science can make to Nexus research at about 3 different levels, though I'm sure there's more. So one, I think that social science research, when it's applied and empirical, as we so badly need, thank you for addressing that, Andrea, in your work, in your presentation, it really helps us complete the social ecological systems picture within the Nexus. So we know that up till now, a huge amount of the work we've done in this research community has really focused on the natural system interactions, on the water in particular. We need to complement that by understanding where the interconnections are with human systems and how those systems are functioning, including governance and governance beyond government. Suits me very well as a definition to work with too for this talk. So the second level, where I think social science can really bring a great addition or complement to what we're already doing within this research field, is to really consider how we design our research processes with great attention to context, to the boundaries of the systems that we're looking at, how we set those and who gets to set those boundaries, to issues of power and the possibilities of social learning, the incentives and structures that are there shaping our institutions and therefore our behavior. So at that second level, it's really maybe the possibility that we can think about how we're doing our research processes so that they can become even more effective in helping us to navigate this really complex challenge. And at the third level, Andrea alluded to it, but I'm going to pick up and reinforce it. This WEF Nexus concept has been missing some level of conceptualization and theorization, particularly with respect to the connection to sustainability outcomes. You know, we're working to a set of assumptions about integration making the difference, or about more information making the difference for sustainability contributions, but we've got to test that and learn and adapt as we go. We're not there yet. So that's my 3-level pitch for what we need to be thinking about within the social science contribution in this field. So what's on my mind a lot these days is the question of transformation. You know, if we're living in this Anthropocene challenge, what we're learning to accept now is that we need this fundamental and radical change in the systems that we're working within, living within, creating today. And so there's a lot of different definitions that go on for this big word transformation. I'm going to use the definition of radical system change. And so some of you might be familiar with this diagram. There's so many graphics to explain this process. But I guess what I'm curious about and why I chose this one is the role that WEF Nexus analysis and open research processes can play in challenging our understanding of business as usual and its effectiveness, helping to perhaps put some pressure to move it into a space where we can let it go. But also to help with the experimentation of new innovations. And they can be innovations, of course, from the spectrum of the technical innovation, policy innovation, governance innovation, institutional innovation. I'm open, I'm agnostic. You can insert your own preferred definition of innovation here. But what role can the WEF Nexus approach play in helping to catalyze niche innovations, or where those already exist, how to accelerate and support their emergence? So that's where I'm curious about what this approach can do. I've done something that I think is, I don't know, perhaps really insulting to people who properly work with this transformations theory, but I've gathered together here some of these big factors we think are important in realizing catalyzation of transformation. So helping with that process of pushing out the old and bringing in the new, if I can put it so simply. And I'm really sorry to anybody who's gnashing their teeth at my very simple explanation. So these factors look like things like being able to see the system and question it. And that can be the natural system and the interactions within it, can be social systems. To challenge narratives, dominant narratives, or to bring about new narratives about what the future looks like, about what change needs to happen, about what's possible, to enhance connections. If we build better connections in our systems, we think that can generate some of the change that we're looking for at that systems change level. Then convergence, power structures, incentives. These are like big words, but these are the types of factors that are critical to systems change. So where does participatory modeling for the Nexus fit into this picture? Well, I'm working with the transdisciplinary framework for knowledge production here. So participatory modeling, in my mind, is ideal in many respects for producing these 3 types of knowledge. So systems knowledge, target knowledge about systems knowledge about the system, how it's interacting, what's happening within it, target knowledge about where we'd like to move that system to, what the new desired states might look like, and transformation knowledge about how we're going to get there. And we believe that doing this knowledge production in a participatory way can make a real difference, particularly because it places us in context of values, the certainties and uncertainties that are myriad in the Nexus. And of course, this question about how to, or the possibilities for enhancing adaptive capacity and agency. So the theory seems to go that once we co-produce knowledge, the system knowledge, target knowledge, and transformation knowledge, and we do that with respect to context and with people from the places that we're studying, we have a chance to reduce uncertainties, to change or help with convergence in values, and look at power structures, look at incentives, and change adaptive capacity. This is a very loose configuration, of course, but I think it's important that we start to lay out what we actually really think is going on with Nexus research when it's connecting, or if it's connecting to this bigger question of systems change. So I believe that that is a feasible, or I guess an interesting proposal to follow as a future research agenda, if that's what we're doing here today. And I guess I wanted to say that I believe it's feasible because it's grounded a little bit on my own experience. So here's where I'm going to talk about the project without getting too deeply embedded in that project work. It was 5 years based in Cambodia in a transboundary landscape there, where there was a lot of hydropower dam development going on. Of course, lots of connections to fisheries production, agricultural production. And the process that we went through was one embedded with local research institutions, WWF as our NGO partner, and the national government. We went through rotations and rotations of causal loop diagramming processes with many different stakeholders. And I'm just giving you some highlights of what we figured out. These are all backed up with our papers. So why I think participatory modeling can catalyze some of these transformations we're looking for is that we were finding in our work that working together on building that system, seeing that system together, simulating it in many different forms, does really give you a chance to bring about convergences in values, to change narratives or to bring up narratives we don't hear normally, and to alter the power dynamics, at least in those groups, at least for a temporary period of time. That's really interesting to know that participatory modeling creates these spaces where new things can happen, these niche innovations perhaps can emerge from. We had experiences where when people saw this system together, even midway through the process, so this is one causal loop diagram that's an amalgamation of a number of different processes, but it was very clear to us, even in the middle of this work in 2016, that local stakeholders were talking about this process being an orientation, a compass to help with the decision making, even before the data was great. And this is not a data-rich environment that we're talking about here. We went on, because we were really curious about what was happening for people in these processes, to create a testing procedure for how expectations in participants were starting to change. And expectations are a major explanatory factor for behavior change, which is why we're curious about that. And we were able to find, even with a small sample, that being part of these processes, going through these systems interpretations together, does change people's expectation about future risks. And also, interestingly, not just at individual level, but in the group level. So you can start to see that people not only start to change what they believe, they start to change what they believe in the same direction. That's really helpful for collective action at later stages. And then finally, we were still able to do quantitative assessments, and we're still able to produce scenarios, these visions of the future, and to do some resilience testing. So even if we had a lot of qualitative and participatory work, we could take it home and do the homework about what we thought was actually happening here, and produce actually rather interesting results that were challenging the assumptions of stakeholders about what the real risks here were. So I'm not going to go into the details, but the headline here was that this system was, the fishery system in the location we were looking at was already so much under pressure that before you put a dam in place, if you started to bring in workers to build that dam, the increase in population would already start to put real pressure on food supply and food security in that location. So it's just this example that this modeling work can really help to surface assumptions and to challenge them, which is really productive. Okay, to finish, I guess the dream for me would be with a social science oriented Nexus research, that we really get good at helping to challenge our notions and assumptions around tried and tested development, which isn't actually working to deliver sustainable development, and to help us picture, you know, this new futures or the possibilities of new futures together. I really believe that within the process of participatory modeling, it allows everybody the chance to start to picture what that future might look like, how good or bad it might be, and what you might want to do to either bring about the good future or to avoid a riskier one. And that's one of the reasons I'm really intrigued and supportive of further work in participatory modeling. So yeah, that's my pitch for future directions. If we could really understand more about what's going on in these types of processes, they might give us a how, a really good reasoned how, maybe even a bit more systematized than what we've got right now for implementing a Nexus approach that can connect to catalyzing and catalyze transformations. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Louisa, and thank you also for showing us how transformation can take place, starting from the theory up to the real implementation. It was really enchanting. We are for sure looking forward to know more, and also how participatory modeling can actually support to take decision and to involve more and more the social science into the Nexus. Thank you again. I will leave the floor now. I see in between that the chat is quite live. So thank you all of you also for answering to our participants. I will pick some afterwards for the great audience here. I leave the floor now to our next speaker, which is Professor Paulo Davide Farah, which is here with us. Good morning, probably from the US, and floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I will try now to share screen. Can you see that?
Yes, fully.
Okay, thank you. So first of all, let me thank you for organizing this event, inviting me. It's very much appreciated to listen to all these colleagues presenting very interesting topic. I really see many connection with the last presentation, but also Professor Andrea Pierce presentation. So it was very interesting for me to listen to all this. I will bring my 2 cents to the conversation with this presentation on water, energy, food nexus in public policy and international law. I was reviewing my presentation yesterday. I felt that this is the better angle for the conversation today. I am an associate professor at West Virginia University Rockefeller School of Policy and Politics, Department of Public Administration, and I also founder for Global Law Initiative for objective of my presentation today. I would like to talk about governance of natural resources and also how this has developed and how this has changed through the years, particularly all thanks also to the increased awareness of interconnection between water, energy, and food, and the interplay between these resources and climate change. The very first thing I would like just to put there on the table, and also coming from the previous presentation, we have heard about the Sustainable Development Goals, and that is really, really important. We should also remember that what the Millennium Development Goals was doing was that it was not connecting and intersecting the different goals of the millenniums to try to understand these risks and these opportunities given by the Nexus. So there are risks because whether they are very important in terms of protecting water, protecting energy, and protecting food or other values or other resources, you need to be careful how will be the interaction with the others if this will be affect negatively any other of the goals. On the Millennium Development Goals, this element was not so clearly addressed. In the Sustainable Development Goals, it's clearly addressed. It is solved? Not at all. So those are the 2 aspects I will try to go through in my presentation today. The Nexus, additionally, has emerged with several variables. We do have the water, energy, food nexus, but we do also the water, energy, food, climate nexus, and we do also have the water, energy, food ecosystem nexus, developed as a methodology by the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe and applied to various basins, water basins, if we talk about water governance as well. The governance actually became more complicated despite all these efforts, because when you are trying to understand the complexity, you are putting factors on the table that slow down actually the processes of governance. Doesn't make it faster, it makes it slower because you are trying to understand the difficulty. And states are unable to govern these resources at the national level. If we talk about, for example, water, international water resources, which are many times shared. So those issues are obviously there. And the states are also unable to do so in the transboundary context, where the situation is very complicated. Which are other additional factors? The emergence of artificial intelligence and big data, adding food for their complexity. Again, challenges not only for water, energy, food nexus, of course, or for the governance of resources, it's challenges for everything. We can see that in the concept of the democratic concepts of public administration in the US or in other countries, elections. So as everything that appears new on the floor, it creates opportunities and challenges. But there are also lack of capabilities and know-how, a rule of law that can come in, I'm not saying in general, but in specific countries. Maybe in some countries, this risk is lower, in other countries is higher. So how to balance this type of challenges when we are focusing on specific country analysis? And there are different needs in the transboundary context when we are talking about water transboundary context, or when we are talking about energy or food, and different culture and administrative procedure as well. If we focus first on water governance, and then I will focus on the others, happens through specific rules and instruments. The Convention of the Law, the Convention on the Law on the Non-Navigational Use of International Water Course of 1992, the Convention on the Law of the Non-Navigational Use of International Water Courses in 1997, and the draft articles of the law Transboundary Aquifers in 2008. These instruments have a few provision and principle addressing different natural resources. For example, the equitable and reasonable utilization and obligation that not cause significant harm, meaning a country cannot simply use country, so that should be a balance of uses for the different countries. And sometimes this is very difficult. You need a treaty among these countries. You need an intervention of international organization to avoid that this ended up to be a conflict among those countries sharing these resources. And these provisions are not sufficient to consider the interplay with all the other resources and climate change. So these provisions are trying to foresee and resolve conflict. They don't take in consideration all these issues of the. If we look to energy governance, then we needed to consider the various some of the sectors, at least oil and gas, nuclear power, renewable energy, and there are specific regulations addressing some of these resources at international level, at regional level. So multilateral or regional, we might have bilateral as well. Sometimes those are so many that it's called that we are in the middle of a spaghetti ball, meaning that all the things intersect and interconnect and conflict. And you don't know when and how. In theory, states, when they committed to a specific new agreement, they should have people in charge in their Ministry of Department of State, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, or other ministry in charge to double check that the new agreements are signing are not conflicting with the existing treaties or agreements with other countries we've previously signed. But this doesn't happen, unfortunately, so well, because the intersections sometimes are not so visible. They appear when we are talking about renewable energy. It's regulated in many different contexts. Let's take, for example, the World Trade Organization. It's regulated for trade in the trade dimension of renewable energy, but oil and gas, it's not. And nuclear power, again, different situations. So that shows you the complexity, because experts need to be addressing these matters in different international organizations, meaning different international treaties with different provisions of conflict, with different governance. And many of these aspects are also domestically or regionally ruled. So how to regulate all these type of different governance and levels. This is called multiscalar and multi-level effect, meaning how you can manage all this scalarity and level. That's the issue that we are talking about here. A mix of treaty, law, and internationalized principle and uniform practice address oil and gas. A large body of international law has developed to regulate nuclear activity given the risk such as the Euratom Treaty, and the absence of international rules for renewables, but still does not mean that there are not conflicts for. The interplay with other natural resources in all these contexts is not considered, meaning additional opportunity of conflict, because there will be possibility of conflictual legal and policy analysis here. Let's move to food governance. Specific treaties address specific elements. The International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture, for example, and there are then connections with certain other fields that has to be considered. Food and agricultural trade. Once again, food and agriculture, it's also a product, sometimes it's also a service, and so it will be falling into the WTO system. And what about intellectual property rights? For example, all the dispute in India or Pakistan or in other places even that can affect the access to food for farmers, or all the intellectual property on seeds. This brings then an enormous list of cases domestically. For example, case law in India about these issues are various on intellectual property on seeds, but can also be on intellectual property on medicine, which is not now the topic for today, but just to say intellectual property, it's a matter that needs to be taken also into account in this context. There is also an absence of a comprehensive convention addressing food governance. They consider new elements such as plant-based diets. What about climate change governance? We do have the Paris Agreement, but we had also, of course, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, from which the Paris Agreement came out, Kyoto, and each of them had pros and cons. There are synergy with other fields that are not considered, and there is the need to see whether the Paris Agreement is effective. I had organized a webinar on March 10 here at West Virginia University, various colleagues, one colleague, a director of the means of implementation of the UNFCCC and was working on the Paris Agreement as well, a colleague that is at the Finnish embassy in Finland, and another colleague from Berkeley University. The conversation that came out was particularly from the colleague from the UNFCCC is that the Paris Agreement is not having the results we would need to reach the main objective. Does it mean we need to give up? No, of course not. We don't have so many other options available, but there is a request, there is a need that countries get more involved. Of course, the positive after the US got back in the Paris Agreement with this Biden administration, that's already something. Does it solve the problem? No, because there are other countries, China, India, and so on, that needs to do their part as well. And does it not solve neither in US? Because when we had the Trump administration, there were many states and cities were on the front runner to respect the expectation of Paris Agreement. But does it mean that now with the Biden administration, the other states were actually against the Paris Agreement, they will do what they're supposed to do? So once again, multi-level, multi-scalar, meaning the central government, meaning that the central administration, the White House will make decisions, and there will be others do it. And this is not only in US, it's like that in China, it's like that in India, it's like that in Europe. So there is these risks. And there is also need to consider synergies in the transboundary, but also in the national context. Again, because countries need to do this implementation by themselves. They need to submit a national determined contribution and try to meet the expectations. Conclusions. First conclusion, because you can see yet. Water, energy, food, and climate change are not considered simultaneously when they are addressed. International law adopts sector-specific agreements, given the increasing technicality of each field, meaning that these technicalities then create problems because there will be conflict coming on the table when we are trying to address the nexus. And we need a more holistic approach to the governance of interconnected and natural resources. yet. International law has become more complicated. The roots, you need to think. The general principle of international law is the sovereignty principle. I don't know what is happening in the chat. I can't open it. So if there are questions, please let me respond at the end. Or if there are issues, tell me as well. So international law, the basic principle is sovereignty. So sovereignty given by what? By the borders. So during the Trump administration, we push a lot the ideas of the wall, of the border, protection of the borders. But when we do that in the US, we cannot expect that somewhere else, for example, in Brazil, when there is the Amazon forest and in other Latin American countries, then they will also decide and say, they are our borders, they are our resources, they are our environmental aspects. We can do whatever we like about it, which is not, of course, true. But international law has developed to the point that international environmental law is also in the picture. And that's require also the protection of the environment. Is that a legal aspect? Unfortunately, not so strong, but there is a growing diversity of actors, subjects, objective, obligation, and dynamics and mechanisms that change this idea of simply of the presence of the states and the power of sovereignty. Numerous international instruments that do not fit squarely into the traditional taxonomy of international law, and there is a decreasing role of the state and an emergence role of the non-state actors. In addition, globalization of economic and financial sector has effect far beyond national borders. The development and widespread dispersion of information and communication technology to all the regions of the world. There is empowering of people from the bottom up as well as facilitating control from top down. And there is the dispersion of danger, whether from disease, the most dramatic example, climate change, or scientific development in synthetic biology, geoengineer, cyberspace, artificial intelligence, or digital currency. All these issues, I went farther, too much farther. All these issues needs to be regulated from the governance perspective, the public policy, and the legal perspective, because all these matters intersect and create problems. Despite all that, shared natural resources cannot be managed unilaterally, as I explained before. States are inclined to pursue their national interests largely driven by economic and societal concerns, even though states must cooperate on the basis of international to protect these resources. What are the failures of international law to address environmental issues? International community has not been able to prevent environmental degradation and natural resource depletion for the reason I explained before. And international rules have been promulgated without the slightest chance of being implemented, unfortunately, because this is also happening, as I just say, with Paris. The failure to comply with provision of environmental convention does not lead to sanction being imposed, meaning the countries are not respecting this agreement coming from international environmental law. They don't have teeth to bite these states, to oblige them to implement these agreements, which is also true in other area of international law, but particularly here. And the environmental treaties do not, the environmental convention lacks such system altogether. So what is the interplay between the nexus concept and the international law? And this will be my last part. The interplay with the water, energy, food nexus still has to find its place in the legal sphere. It's unclear how the nexus concept can be used to deliver water, energy, and food security, because that's really the key element. The security, the national security, for complete elimination of the current system and the adoption of new regulatory frameworks better suited to implementation of the nexus concept, meaning All these treaties are confusing, are intersecting, are, like I say, spaghetti balls. Let's try to remove them and restart from scratch, because now we know we need to look to these resources as a wall, as a nexus. Inevitable, with lack of centralized organ, specialization of the law, different structure of the legal norms, parallel regulation, competitive regulation, and enlargement of the scope of international law. And this is necessary to taking in consideration for regulating the interplay between natural resources and climate change. But fragmentation of international law is actually needed. Fragmentation in international law, in particular, is needed to the existence of global problems that require good management in a efficient manner while empowering new interests and form of expertise. This pragmatic approach is a must to avoid legal traffic and address situation and circumstances. The water, energy, food, nexus sectors have a different degree of regulation globally. As I say, certain aspects are regulated as a multilateral agreement, some others as a regional, some others as bilateral. So there are plenty of complexity. The most established global regulatory framework are the ones related to the water. International water law has been slowly but progressively being developed in the last few decades. This similar situation is for climate change. The energy field lacks the existence of an holistic international energy treaty addressing all the issues related to energy matter. There is a global comprehensive convention addressing all the issues related to the food sector, where numerous regulations have been adopted within the existence treaties such as the GATT as part of the WTO. And they're also addressing the interlinkage between the different sectors need to be considered the realities mentioned. So all these developments required to occur at the international level will take years to happen. Like for climate change, we do need a lot to do, but it takes so slow. And so we do have problems there. Numerous negotiation rounds, agreement and disagreement, discussion and objection will emerge. And so that's the reason why I believe on food and whether we have on energy and climate change, we'll have a trouble to be able to be merged and to try to find solution altogether. The process of ratifying by different states of something so complicated and new may occur or not. And so it can take years to have a ratification of new treaties.
Paulo, are we?
Yes.
Could you conclude in the next minute?
Thank you. Last 3 slides.
Great,
yes.
Thank you.
So there are short-term state interests, constant administration changes, ideological differences, different priorities, difference of incapabilities, and capacities and situation for each country. Still, the international law has an important role to play. We saw that with the pandemic, global governance through international law represent a combat global challenges, such as climate change or the coronavirus. And global regulatory framework have already played a great role and are expected to play an important role due to the global nature of the existing emerging problems or so-called global challenges. And global regulatory framework are needed where natural resources and climate change regulation represent just one matter that requires a global intervention by the international community. So there is a need to navigate between the need to regulate the interplay of water, energy, and food sectors, as well as the climate change and the current position of international law. So all this conversation, everything I heard up to now, and I'm sorry I took probably 5 or 6 more minutes than the previous speaker to complete my speech, is very, very important because all the governance networks, all the issues that have been discussing nourish also my conversation. So I really appreciate to be here today, and I thank you for the opportunity to share my idea with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Paulo, and thank you for bringing also this not always on the explored actually sector that is below within the Nexus. And I really think that it's very important also to look at it and see how networks and connection can bound and support the research and also facilitate the inclusion of the Nexus also at the governmental level. So thank you also for that. And I see already that there are questions for you in the chat. The chat is super live. And now please let me introduce to you with great pleasure. This is Dr. Magdio Kudian, the project and PI lead of the Belmont Forum and professor at Penn State University. So Matthew, floor is yours and good to see you again. Matthew, you are muted.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes, and we miss your presentation full screen.
Okay.
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Serena, for the invitation to present at this webinar. I would like to share some of the results that are emerging from the project that Serena mentioned, which I'm leading, which involves partners at Penn State University, Cranfield in the UK, University of Sao Paulo, UN Habitat in Geneva, and several other partners, including some of our partners in Africa, India, and Ethiopia. I think it's important to get straight to some of the issues that were raised by Andrea and by Louisa. I think it's important to provide context to the discussion. And a lot of the ideas that I'm going to be reporting on and discussing today are emerging from our existing project, but they've also, you can trace back the roots to some of these ideas to the work that we started while I was at the UNU. So I think that's a testimony to the importance of global public goods research. It's extremely important to work across disciplines, to work across regions, because that's a fantastic way to advance our knowledge of the Nexus. So the first real point that I'd like to mention here is that our point of reference in this whole discussion was the Sustainable Development Goals. And I think here it's important to go back to the point that Andrea mentioned earlier on, which is it's important to make a distinction between government and governance. And it's an extremely important point. But having said that, I think what we've realized through most of our work, especially with the UN, is that the biggest trigger or the biggest opportunity that you have to scale out and to scale up the results of scientific research is actually by working with government, not working without government. And the challenge really is, how do you do that? How do you work with government in a way that has maximum impact? And I think governance, the governance discussion really should center on that. So what our review has uncovered so far is that there are two broad strands of scientific work on the Nexus. One is modeling work that several of the previous presenters have mentioned, which is basically focused on reporting on the status of the environment, and more or less in the tradition of the Club of Rome or the Brundtland Commission. The second is modeling that's focused on trying to understand what we can do as a result of scientific work that would actually make the situation better, which is how do we work with governments to try and make things better. And here there are some examples, for example, from the models that have been developed with regard to LEAP, with WEEP, and I refer to some of our work that we did at UNU, which had to do with developing a model for wastewater as it relates to SDG 6.3. But what these two things indicate is that there are two possible directions of change. One is that we can focus within the very limited frame that the present Nexus discussion is focused on, which is studying interactions between resources. And as a result, we can propose that we need to have greater integration of resource use. That's one possible way in which we can proceed. The other way that we can proceed is to actually try and study the trade-offs involved as a result of these interactions, and to propose a much broader canvas that would include not just resources, but also understanding the links to public services, like, for instance, irrigation services, water supply, and wastewater. Now, if we choose to focus on a broader canvas, then you will realize that we are actually no longer talking only about the water, energy, food nexus, but we're talking about a bigger set of issues which straddle what I call the environment development nexus. And what that implies are 5 things. One is we will no longer limit our analysis and our examination of the nexus to issues of efficiency, but we will have to address issues of equity in the way in which resources are used, in the way in which infrastructure is constructed, operated, and maintained. Number 2, you'll have to try and understand the thresholds at which governments will respond to a problem. So, for instance, there are times when we have a lot of data which shows there is no problem, and yet governments respond. And there are times when there's a lot of data which shows that there is a big problem, and governments do not do anything about it. So if you look at the literature on the poverty environment nexus, for instance, if you look at the literature on results-based financing and nudge studies, you'll begin to understand the importance of engaging with this issue of thresholds. Under what conditions will governments do something, and why do they not do something when there is compelling evidence that they should indeed engage? Number 3, it is also important to understand that governments do a lot of things, but that development planning and implementation is not linear. It's not monotone, and it involves feedback. And yet, management information systems within large bureaucracies, not just in the developing world, but even in the developed world, are often ill-equipped to handle feedback on resource use and management of public infrastructure. So we don't know anything about outputs, outcomes, and impact. And this is the point that Louisa was mentioning in her presentation, how important it is to challenge some of the assumptions that we have when we start our research about what will happen as a result of what we do. Now, all of this adds credence to the need for us to engage with a much broader canvas of the environment development nexus. And there is also recent studies that show that most environmental stresses are since most environmental stresses are related to the use of resources in manufacturing and ancillary services, much of the analysis of the water, energy, food resource nexus is actually a misnomer. It doesn't really serve any purpose if we only focused on the resource nexus. And some of these studies are actually based out of examples that come out of China and come out of the US. So what are the implications then of engaging with the broader environment development nexus from a governance perspective? There are 3 broad issues. One is, by drawing upon the literature on incrementalism in political science, we inquire what are the pathways for integrating scientific inputs into environmental policy and planning, which is the normative basis of our scientific work. The second issue is you can refer to the emerging work on transition planning and backcasting in contrast to foresight analysis to ask what approaches, frameworks, and methods can support the piloting of policy instruments, guidelines, notifications, standards, circulars, and directives in environmental planning. And this is what we call the conceptual basis. And this is what Andrea was referring to. What is the context? What is our understanding of government, of governments and governance? And how do we link our scientific research to that? And I believe, and I'm making the argument, that guidelines, notification standards, circulars, and directives are one way in which we can actually engage with the policy discussion. And finally, of course, there's a lot of work on agent-based modelings, agent-based models and agent-based modeling. And it is possible for us to address issues of data, which several of the previous speakers have addressed and brought up. But the idea behind generating more data and collecting more data and analyzing data is really to provide more frequent, reliable, and disaggregated evidence that can advance the use of environmental models in decision making. So that's the operational basis. And we need to ask ourselves, why do we need data? Do we need data? And for what? And this is why I refer to what I call boundary science. I think it is really important, and it is high time that we really shake off our illusions about what the nexus are. And if we are really interested in engaging with governance and engaging in a serious discussion on the SDGs, it is important for us to engage with an emergent body of literature encompassing methods, models, theory, and data transformation techniques that are born out of advancements in fields of public administration, political ecology, earth observations, and data science. So that really is what we refer to as boundary science. And it focuses on three aspects, and I think Louisa referred to some of these things. One, the issue of boundary conditions in governance. 5, typologies of trade-offs, and you can get to understand these trade-offs by looking at the results of a lot of public goods research. For instance, for example, from organizations like the CGIAR. And you also need to understand that several of us are really ill-equipped to do nexus research because we just don't have the skills to do that. And this is another issue that boundary science would put a spotlight on. The third issue is boundary science is focused on understanding the basis for synergies in governance through an analysis of agency behavior within large bureaucracies and trying to identify incentives that are needed to empower individuals to coordinate their actions, both at the level of governments, but also at the level of communities, to mitigate extreme trade-offs in environmental governance. And what this really means is boundary science would challenge conventional metrics of what we consider to be successful research, what we consider to be failures in research, and you place a value on skills that for a very long time has been ignored in social science research, or for instance, in environmental research. Skills of horizon scanning, regional consultation, strategic communication, political negotiation, and data valorization. These are extremely important skills that we in science normally overlook or undermine and don't accord much of a value to. So I'd like to end by providing you with a slide, which is, so what can we do about it? And a number of the previous presenters have talked about the things that we can do. And I think two of the things that are coming out of the Belmont Forum project that I'm leading at the moment is one, a practical set of things that we can do as students, as young professionals, which is, let's get going. Let's work with data and let's learn from the data. So we are launching in a couple of weeks from now here in the US, what we call the Climate Panel, which is an open access platform that employs online learning to connect data with models and engage decision makers at the level of governments and communities in sub-Saharan Africa. So we're starting initially with a focus on Africa. And through this presentation, I'd like to invite you to visit the panel, visit the portal, maybe in a couple of weeks from now. It's not live yet, we're working on it. Visit it, and the invitation is to all of you to join us in this initiative. The idea really is to do 3 things. Map the intensity of trade-offs. Number 2, identify incentives for public action, which goes just beyond mapping the condition of the environment, but identifying incentives for public action that mitigate trade-offs. And number 3, over a period of time, you document approaches, you document frameworks, you document methods that aids the development of integrative nexus models with the potential to influence decision-making. And I also would like to share with you that we've got a book that comes out maybe also in 2 weeks from now that has inspired the Climate Panel. And it's a book written with a gender specialist from the United Nations who's worked previously with the United Nations. And we kind of address or try and engage with a number of these misconceptions that we have about the role of governance in the nexus. And we make the case for an engagement with a much broader canvas, which is that of the environment development nexus. And we ask very critical questions about whether data is indeed required in the way in which the SDGs mandate the collection and analysis of data. Or is another data light approach a more viable option for engaging with the Nexus approach as it relates to the SDGs. So I'd like to stop there and maybe take questions if there are. But thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you, Matthew, for this visionary new avenue that we could take to with the Nexus and the Nexus agenda. Thank you. And also thank you for the peep preview for what is about to come. I'm really looking forward to know more also about your new projects. You seem very dynamic up there in US. So looking forward. I see the chat now that I am trying to go on. There are around about 20 questions that I already thank you all the panelists that have already helped me in facilitating the process. You already answered them. I will try to maybe pick some that maybe we can bring back again to the arena also for the people that who haven't followed the chat. And maybe I will start with the first question that was from our colleague Brau Flor. And that was for Andrea Pierce. So that what drives the WEF nexus in city? It is food more than water and energy. Did you find evidence then of the nexus concept motivates cities to act and seek for energies on the WEF nexus? I think this is a very interesting questions that maybe if you may allow, Andrea, you could also bring back to the audience.
Sure. Thank you, Serena, and thank you, Flor, for that question. So in our cases at least, most of the folks that we were dealing with don't know about the nexus. This is a concept that's fairly technical, even with the professionals that we've interacted with, such as planners and government. So food is for sure the most tangible element of the nexus for folks that we've interacted with at the urban scale. So thinking about urban gardening or urban farms, and especially now during COVID with serious food insecurity in some places, thinking about better ways to access healthy, affordable food locally was very important. So in all three of our cases, we have sort of converged around food as the primary element at the urban scale. To your second point, did you find evidence that the nexus concept was motivating cities? Certainly in our cases, because this concept was very new, I would say no. We're more at the stage of building knowledge around the opportunities of using the nexus in governance and policy at our cases. But I'm sure my colleagues can talk to their cases as well if they have seen this successfully used in other places. We're at an earlier stage with our cases.
Thank you, Andrea. I think I move then to the next questions, and this one is I see that this is for Chrissy Lapsidou, and I will pick one that it comes from my side in this case, and I would be more interested on the project that you have now on the Erasmus, and this is more related to the serious game. And we have been practicing, also I was testifying one of these exercises, which I found extremely interesting, but how would you envision this type of work to be brought actually to the implementation field level, let's say, moving it from the academia more onto the implementation? If you have any experience, if you would like to share it with us. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Serena, for this nice question. So I guess we have been thinking that the living labs would be the entity or the structure that we need to invest on, and we are pushing this. When I say we, this is also through Water Europe. There's a consensus that this is the way to get citizens on board. and start using these tools. So on the one hand, we are working on the tools, and there's a lot of the digital world coming in to make this smart, to realize our smart water vision. And on the other hand, the involvement of the people should happen through the living labs. And living labs are now more and more recognized, and I'm happy to see that even from the European Commission. I mean, we have a we have a definition that we are have developed. We would say that they are the user-centered open innovation ecosystems based on a systematic user co-creation approach in a public-private people partnership. So, and they are structures that integrate research and innovation processes in real life communities and settings. So, this is the way that we think should go. And like I said, we're pushing with the European Commission to recognize these entities and to make them even mandatory in situations. And we are thinking of them in different levels. Some of them will be local, others would be river basin level, others would be national. Also, there might be rural, industrial, urban, so they might have different focuses. And of course, it's always starting with the stakeholders, mapping them and bringing them together in these settings, and actually showing these tools to them and seeing, getting their input and incorporating it in the tools even further.
Thank you, Chrissy. I move now to my next speaker, which is Mona Arlo. This was mostly related to the digitalization. Likewise, I would say, so what is your experience in using these digitalization tools also in bringing it to decision-making processes, and which was the approach that most likely these decision makers have had before getting into the how to use data information through digitalization, and which was the acceptance level of this type of exercise. Because I've seen in the chat a lot of discussion about being optimistic towards this approach, but maybe which was your experience when you started approaching to it?
Thanks, Serena, for the question. It's a very precise one. I would see that, yes, it's easy to be optimistic at this point, because there are it's not really been enforced in the or used very widely in the governance yet as a tool. I see it more, there are outcomes of research projects and individual case studies where it has been applied, and not that widely applied on a daily basis. And I saying that, I am convinced that there is when there are tools out there more widely available, I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be widely accepted, because it certainly it helps also the work of the policymakers and the decision makers, and it also makes the work more fun when you're using these tools. So I'm still optimistic, but as I said, also due to the fact that gathering the data to have, for instance, if you have a model or I want to visualize the impact of a certain decision, you need to gather the data around it so it actually makes sense. So you have a sort of a best educated, at least somewhat educated guess of what's going to be the impact of your decision. And this is quite laborious. So this is why we are not really there yet. We can make a model, but then to populate it with the correct data, the vast amount of data is sort of like making the whole process a little bit slow.
Thank you, Mona. And let's keep optimistic. And I also believe that digitalization is one of also the great tool that can really push and demonstrate more forward the possibility of the nexus. Thank you. I move to my next question. This time is to Dr. Paulo Farah. And this comes from one of our colleagues that says that it seems to me that although not yet explicitly adopted by academics, Nexus is very present in foreigner investment in national projects that deal with the water, energy, food intersection. In that sense, how would you see the role played by a regulated regulation such as bids, formats, and arbitration, which usually is late regarding sustainability issue? Quite of a technical question, Paulo. Could you give some insight?
I will try. I saw that other colleagues as also were faster than me reply to others. So I will try to reply to this and say a few words of the other.
And please be free to pick from others.
Yes, absolutely. So focusing on the question you have just asked, I believe that the context of the bilateral investment treaties is very complicated because some of the countries that they are the recipient of the investments and meaning also the operation are not the strongest in terms of negotiating power. So they risk that their treaties are disfavorable. So I would say I would question the fact of using the nexus there. It would be again an additional element of not a positive but negative for the recipient country. I'm not saying that there is not a chance because the entry door generally for arbitration, because even arbitration was mentioned there, or for bilateral investment treaties, is the practice, the general practice of international law. And when the general practice, like, takes the issues of business and human rights, if companies keep telling publicly, we commit to corporate social responsibility, we commit to corporate accountability, they keep saying that, there might be then at a certain moment an arbitrator that will say, listen, the general principles plus your constant declaration that you commit to respect human rights in the business sector convince me to decide in this way. So if we return back on the nexus, I'm not 100% sure that this is the entry door, but I would like to hear more maybe from Luisa if you want to speak. But going to the other aspects that they were mentioning, the other questions about environmental integration principle at best available scientific knowledge in the Paris Agreement, I agree with Louise. It's already very complicated to try to convince institutions to operate holistically. So I'm afraid, once again, from a legal perspective, but even from a policy perspective, bringing in this principle through that door, it's a long shot. So I would love to see it, but I'm not sure it's gonna happen. And then the other question that I think that was somehow related to my presentation is the one on data stewardship, human rights, and ethics frameworks. So the informed consent, once again, I do agree a lot, but this is not happening all around the world. So you are maybe even testing on health issues, or you are monitor with your phone and applications. And the informed consent is not that you click something in a long 100 pages declaration and maybe there is a footnote there. It should be really informed consent. So once again, this is another important matter. But I mean, I would like to hear from if it's possible also to let those are questions asking Luisa if she wants to react or she wants to react in writing. I'm available here to react again. Thank you.
She might be able to react in writing so that you can continue the conversation. I will move now to my next speaker, which is Luis Gallagher. And there was already quite of interactive actions between some of our attendees about co-creation and learning processes between the internal learning processes within a teamwork and the external processes of building up of co-creation. Maybe you could expand a bit more on that within your experience and what you find the most challenges and maybe how this learning process along the projects itself change and evolves. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. So firstly, with the external stakeholders, I just want to say, similar to Andrea, we use the term nexus when we went to our local provincial authorities and to our local partners, and it's a no-go. Like, they didn't understand that concept. It's not in common usage. What they responded to well in some respects was the need for integrated assessments, integrated development planning. That seemed to have hit the ground a bit more where we were. With respect to the internal learning, I think it's absolutely critical because, at least in our case, we consider ourselves to be an innovation project. We were so lucky to be funded by two funders, the Nomus Foundation and Mava Foundation, that really valued the fundamental research aspect of what we were doing. So they didn't want necessarily immediate impact on the ground, thank God. What they were looking for was us really unpacking what's going on in this co-creation or participatory process. And so having the possibility to stop and really think about, for whom are we doing this? For what are we doing this? Why do we think it's going to work? What would work even mean? And then checking that iteratively as we were going, it was absolutely invaluable. Huge amount of work behind the scenes, as I wrote to the question poser Tamara. Maybe something I should write up one of these days, but it was a rather complicated framework of research impact assessment and then understanding what that looked like in the context, in the political reality we were facing, in the cross-scale reality we were facing of these large hydropower dams being decided really at national level is a generous way of saying it. In the back rooms of pubs is what I also heard some of these decisions were being taken within, so really outside of the formal government processes. And so we would have had a very hard time to link process to outcome immediately within the lifetime of the project. And so that's going to bring me to my very last point on this, the project lifetimes we have to deal with of 2-3 years, very hard to figure out what impact is going to look like at a reasonable level within that time frame. And so if there's any research funders and other types of funders on the call, I'm going to beg for longer term project horizons. Our stakeholders told us 10 years. It's 10-year social change process, and social change is small, and it starts in these kind of mystic myriad of ways, and it can evolve and snowball over time, but we didn't have the time to go back afterwards and check as much as we would have wanted to. So I'm just gonna make a plug there while I can.
Great. I will sign up for that too. So let me move to our next panelist here with Matthew. I would like to ask you something that also the audience have been wondering, or like was going on with the discussion, and is how can research actively factor in to balance out with personal resources and individual groups, and how the governance and law can overcome the challenge towards the nexus. So how our research on the nexus can help through governance or nexus-oriented governance to reduce inequality. And second of all, maybe some more knowledge on your new project, and whether also this new project would tackle this inequality, and maybe how to structure more integrated governance on the nexus.
Thank you. I think, Serena, to answer your first point, I think what we're missing at this point is really a unifying framework that we can all agree on, that we can all understand. So I think what we're missing really at this point, and for a long time now, is a grammar that we can all understand, like English or Italian, that, you know, this is what the nexus is and this is what we're trying to achieve. And this, I think, leads on to your second question, which is the only way you can do that, find out and develop a unified framework is by actually doing it. And I think the limitations of research work is that we can write papers and we can write books, but if you do not engage with the governance process, the political process, then there is really no way in which you can continue to learn. And that's why very often you find the literature tends to go around in circles about integration, interactions, integration, interactions. And we are finding, for instance, in our work presently, that when people find it difficult to understand, they tend to withdraw to their corners, and then they get very defensive, and they get very they tend to personalize things, and that is not always very healthy. So I think what we're trying to do with the climate panel is to actually focus on young people, young professionals. These are the people who are most interested in this because they're either studying it or they're intrigued, but they cannot travel anymore because of COVID. So these are the kinds of people we're trying to reach out to and say, let's do something practical that would kind of bridge the gaps between science and what we do as scientists and what actually happens in the policy process, which is by its very logic, very different. And so that's something that we're trying to do to bridge that in a very practical way. And of course, it's inspired. Whenever you say these kinds of things, people say, oh, that's not science. But I think the point we want to make is that this initiative was inspired by the book that we've written for Elsevier. So it's inspired by what we're learning from that the nexus is not complete until you start doing it. And so that's the connection that we want to make between science and practice. Yeah, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew, also for bridging also this aspect of the learning that is not only within project, but is also for future generation is what we have also to bring not only awareness, but really start to shape the new generation toward a more oriented nexus that wants to implement the nexus. So with that, I want to close by saying that this was a very engaging webinar. I really want to thank you all the panelists because each of you have brought one aspect in which the nexus can be either studied, addressed, or implemented. And I agree with Matthew to say that we need also a framework that is understandable by the most, and it's understood also by the most. And I think that that would make us speaking the same language is also one of the idea of the Nexus project cluster that really wants to bring at the same level or the same understanding level, let's say like that, the different scientists, practitioners, or policymakers, so that we could move forward with the next level of implementation of the Nexus at the very holistic framework, let's say like that. With that, I would like to thank each of the panelists, but also all the participants. You have been many here, and I wish you a good Monday evening or morning, wherever you are sitting at. And thank you again for being here. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. This was great.
Thank you, Serena.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.